Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin today with the increasing tensions between the U.S. and Iran and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Good morning, Mr. Secretary, and happy Father's Day.
Thank you. Good morning.
We've had a series of events in past days, the attacks on the tankers and these reports of a missile being fired at a U.S. drone. How is the U.S. going to respond?
Well, I think you have to put it in the context of 40 years of behavior inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is consistent with how they have behaved previously. They did it when they were in the JCPOA. They built their missile program. We relieved sanctions. They took American sailors hostage. This is a regime that has caused much trouble around the world. The last 40 days, we've seen a number of activities, not just these past two, but 4 other commercial ships, which challenged the international norms of freedom of navigation. The United States is considering a full range of options. We've briefed the president a couple of times. We'll continue to keep him updated. We are confident that we can take a set of actions that can restore deterrence, which is our mission set.
You say a full range of options. Does that include a military response?
Of course. Of course, the president will consider everything we need to do to make sure, right? But what the president said, we don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. The previous administration put them on a pathway that virtually guaranteed that they could get there. So we withdrew from the ridiculous JCPOA and are moving ourselves towards a set of policies which will convince Iran to behave simply like a normal nation. And so you've seen them attacking international waterways, trying to, frankly, drive up the price of crude oil around the world so that the world will cry uncle and allow Iran to
do that. If they're so cash-strapped and they need these customers, why would they attack them?
Because Iran can't sell its crude oil. We've stopped them from doing that. We've put sanctions in place that have taken them from roughly 2.7 barrels per day, million barrels per day, with American sanctions.
CENTCOM released this video of purporting to show an IRGC Revolutionary Guard patrol boat pulling up alongside these vessels and removing a mine from the hull of the ship. How certain are you that this is the IRGC, and will you take that evidence and present it to our allies and the United Nations?
Of course we will.
When?
And we don't just purport. That's what that video is. This was taken from an American camera. This is the stuff. This is the real data. Yes, we've shared it with allies already. You've had the chance to see it. I made a bunch of phone calls yesterday. I'll make a whole bunch more calls today. The world needs to unite against this threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And is the IRGC?
Yes, Margaret.
Definitely the Revolutionary Guard Corps?
It is. And Margaret, I'll remind you, too. China gets over 80% of its crude oil transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea, Japan, these nations are incredibly dependent on these resources. We're prepared to do our part. We always defend freedom of navigation. We are going to work to build out a set of countries that have deep vested interest in keeping that strait open to help us do that.
So when you talk about military response, you're talking about that, keeping the waterways open. You are not at this point talking about a strike on Iran.
Oh, goodness. President Trump has said very clearly he doesn't want to go to war. At the same time, we've made very clear that
Do you have the legal authorization for a strike on Iran?
We always have the authorization to defend American interests. Remember, they now have attacked U.S. aircraft. On June 6th, there was a missile fired from Yemen that we assess had Iranian assistance that took down an MQ-9 aircraft. These are attacks on fundamental international norms and now on American interests, and we always have the right to defend our country.
But I ask you because there are questions about whether the existing authorization for use of military force, the AUMF, would actually include a strike on Iran.
Sure.
Are you confident that you could go and not have to ask Congress for permission to take action?
Morgan, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but the American people should be very confident the actions that the United States takes under President Trump will always be lawful, always consistent with our Constitution, and we will always do the hard task it takes to protect American interests wherever they are.
But do you need Congress's permission?
To do what, Margaret? I mean, I don't know how to answer the question in the abstract. Permission.
Well, you said a range of options are being looked at.
Yes,
so.
Every option we look at will be fully lawful.
Well, I want to ask you that because when you were trying to lay out this case, as you know, some allies have said that video released was not enough to convince them, with the exception of the UK and Saudi Arabia. Some allies are saying we need to see more and hear more from the United States. President Trump, as you said, he campaigned against Middle East wars. But there's also this perception that the administration's spoiling for this fight. You were a vocal critic when you were in Congress of the nuclear deal you called the JCPOA earlier. The National Security Advisor right now is one of the architects of the 2003 war in Iraq. According to the latest Economist poll, 51% of Americans say the president is not honest versus 33% who say he is. If you have a credibility gap, that is going to be hard for you to sell something to the American public. How do you resolve that?
Margaret, we're not selling anything. These are simple facts. I've had many conversations over the past, frankly, weeks talking about Iran's activity. No one doubts the data set. I haven't heard a single person say
the German foreign minister said the video was not enough.
The German foreign minister has seen a great deal more than just that video. He will continue to see more. I will concede there are countries that just wish this would go away, and they want to act in a way that is counterfactual. No one disputes that this is the Islamic Republic of Iran taking these actions to deny this international waterway and the freedom of navigation that is a fundamental right of every country to travel through that. No, I've seen no one deny it. And I'm confident that as we continue to develop the fact pattern, countries around the world will not only accept the basic facts, which I think are indisputable, but will come to understand that this is an important mission for the world.
One of the things when you were at the podium at the State Department earlier this week, you presented as a fact was an attack that was carried out in Kabul in May. Mm-hmm. The Taliban said they carried it out, but you blamed Iran for it. What evidence do you have that Iran was behind that attack?
Margaret, in that same statement, the Taliban said they killed 10 people. I would suggest to you that the credibility of the Taliban is not something you ought to bring onto your show.
But you believe Iran was behind it.
We have confidence that Iran instigated this attack. I can't share any more of the intelligence, but I wouldn't have said it if the intelligence community hadn't become convinced that this was the case.
So there's more that you can't share with us to back that up?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Iran state media says that they are going to start looking at ramping up their production of nuclear fuel. What does the U.S. do to stop this if you've already withdrawn from the nuclear accord?
Think about that. Iran is now announcing that in a matter of days they can begin to spin up their nuclear program. This tells you how flawed the deal was, right? It tells you that the deal had no capacity to actually stop them.
What do you do now? Do you just keep putting more sanctions on? Desperation doesn't always lead to the best decision-making.
Our intention is this. We know that their nuclear program accelerates if they have more money and wealth. If they have more capacity, more resources, they have the access to metals and to materials and to fissile material. If we relieve sanctions, their nuclear program presents an even greater risk to the United States. And so our mission has been very clear. Deny them the wealth and resources and their capacity to build out a nuclear program and be prepared to do all that it takes to prevent that from happening.
I want to ask you quickly about Russia. The New York Times is reporting that the U.S. is escalating digital attacks, cyber attacks inside of Russia to hit back an attempted interference in 2018. The president has called this report both false and treasonous, which then suggests that there is some truth to it. So which is it?
I never comment on intelligence matters.
The president said it was...
I never comment on intelligence matters. Having come from being CIA director, I know how important it is. But you should know, and your viewers should know, that the United States of America under President Trump has taken enormous effort to ensure that our elections are not interfered with, not from Russia, not from any other country in the world. It's a serious matter. It's one that this administration took seriously at the direction of President Trump from the very beginning of his time in office, and will continue to do that. I only wish the previous administration had been so serious about preventing election interference.
It's interesting that we are sharpening this point because it's the same week when we heard from the president, as you know, who told an interviewer on ABC earlier this week that he would first listen to a foreign government if they tried to offer him dirt on an opponent and then make a decision as to whether or not to inform the FBI. As the former CIA director, someone who talks every day to foreign governments, what would you advise the president to do?
President Trump clarified his remarks. I think it's pretty clear he'll do the right thing. I'm highly confident of that. I don't have anything else to add. I saw his remarks. He said, I think in both instances, he said he'd do both. He said he'd report this to the FBI. Look, you all present this as...
He used the word maybe.
Yeah, I listened to this very closely. The president made very clear he's going to do the right thing. I have enormous confidence in that. I've watched him do it.
Call the FBI.
I've watched him do the right thing every time we've had an important national security decision to be made. He's evaluated options and made very good choices about how to proceed.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time.
Margaret, thank you.
We turn now to Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton. In addition to serving on the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, he has also written a new book called Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery. Good morning and happy Father's Day, Senator.
Good morning, Margaret. Thanks for having me on.
You have long been defined as a hawk on Iran. You see these recent attacks. These are commercial vessels, not military installations. What kind of response is warranted?
Well, Iran for 40 years has engaged in this kind of attacks, going back to the 1980s. In fact, Ronald Reagan had to reflag a lot of vessels going through the Persian Gulf and ultimately take military action against Iran in 1988. These unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike.
You're comparing the tanker war in the 80s to now and saying that that's the kind of military response you want to see?
We can make a military response in a time and in a manner of our choosing, but yes, unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
A retaliatory strike. When we had Secretary Pompeo on just a few moments ago, he said the U.S. always has the authorization to defend American interests. As someone who sits in Congress, do you believe that he can act, the administration can act, without coming to Congress first?
Yes, Margaret. Going back to President Washington and all the way down to President Trump, the fastest way to get the fire and fury of the U.S. military unleashed on you is to interfere with the freedom of navigation on the open seas and in the air. That's exactly what Iran is doing, and one of the world's most important strategic choke points. The president has the authorization to act to defend American interests. Certainly, it would be in keeping with what President Obama did unwisely in Libya in 2011 in launching a weeks-long campaign to overthrow the government there. What I'm talking about is not like what we've seen in Iraq for the last 16 years or Afghanistan for the last 18 years, but retaliatory military strikes against Iran that make it clear we will not tolerate any kind of attacks on commercial shipping on the open seas.
So you believe that the existing authorization for military force is sufficient. You've also said, though, and as someone who served in Iraq, you have an appreciation for the need to be careful in parsing intelligence and in first reports. How do you convince the American people that they need to stomach something in terms of a potential strike that you're describing as somewhat easy to carry out when there were such vast underestimations of what U.S. force would bring about in Iraq and elsewhere in the past?
Margaret, those are two very different things. In 2002, our intelligence agencies, just like every Western intelligence agency, was trying to assess the state of a weapons of mass destruction program, one of the things that states work the hardest to keep secret. There's really not much to assess right here. Everybody can see with their own two eyes those Iranian sailors going up to a ship and taking a mine off of it. Iranian sailors ultimately boarded and took hostage the crew of one of those ships that they just released yesterday. They tried to shoot down one of our surveillance aircrafts over the Persian Gulf as we were simply trying to monitor what had happened there. As you heard Secretary Pompeo have said, they've increased their support on attacks on American troops by supporting a Taliban attack in Afghanistan, just like they killed 500 Americans in the Iraq War. So there's no doubt here what Iran is up to. They are struggling under the sanctions that we have placed on them. The status quo for them is unacceptable. They're hoping that they can drive up the price of oil and therefore benefit from it since their oil exports have declined so much, and also get more pressure put on the United States to back off our campaign of maximum pressure. That's not going to happen. If anything, we need to increase that pressure, and I think this unprovoked attack on commercial shipping warrants retaliatory military strikes.
Okay, so that's a step farther than what the Secretary said the President was currently willing to stomach. I want to ask you as well about what the President said this week. He said he would listen, as you heard in that ABC interview, to foreign countries who might have dirt on his opponents before deciding whether or not to report it to the FBI. Doesn't this undermine all of the efforts to make our elections secure when you have the President of the United States say something like that?
No, Margaret. He said as well, not just on ABC, but especially on Fox and Friends later in the week, that he would, in fact, report those kind of contacts to the FBI. That's a very different thing, too, than what happened in 2016.
Right, but that's why it's relevant now. And so, what we're talking about now in terms of negative signals.
And the president said that he would report that to the FBI. And remember, that's just simply receiving information in a hypothetical. What happened in 2016 is Hillary Clinton hired a foreign spy who then recruited, let me finish, who then recruited Russian spies to fabricate lies about her political opponents that was then used to generate a law enforcement investigation into the administration's political opponents.
So you're okay with what the president said?
The president said that he would report those kind of contacts to the FBI.
He said maybe. He said maybe. I'm asking you. I ask you
The
the
president
same
said he
question.
would,
you
as,
say
as, any,
maybe
as
is your
anyone
answer?
should. And what people should not do is what Hillary Clinton and the Democrats did, which is hire a foreign spy to recruit Russian spies to fabricate lies about their political opponents.
Is Tom Cotton's answer to the question maybe when it comes to offering you and your campaign dirt?
I would report those kind of contacts to the FBI.
No, maybe. Thank you very much, Senator.
you.
We'll be back in 1 minute with Congressman Adam Schiff.